Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Analyzing Finance with Nick live stream. Today, I'm going to use this to talk about the economic impact of the California fires. Uh, I may do a longer form video about this eventually or speak about it at a future meetup, but there's more facts that have come on. But with a week in with this disaster, there is some insights that we can talk about about what's going on when it comes to the fires and what is the actual economic impact of it. And then after that, we're going to just have our usual Q&A that we have normally with these live streams. So first, let's get started with my thoughts on the fires. And if you have any questions specifically about the fires, feel free to write them in the comment. And then also the other thing too is if you have any other questions, feel free to write those. But if you want to make sure your questions get answered, because we tend to have a flood of questions when I do these, please leave it a super chat to make sure that your questions get answered. So let's first start with my talk about the fire specifically. Los Angeles is on fire. It has been for the last week. The combination of a dry winter where we didn't really see that much rain in December, a very wet year last year where a lot of flammable vegetation grew a lot thicker than usual, the Santa Ana winds blowing fires from elsewhere and possible arson has resulted in the biggest fire disaster probably in the history of the state of California. And some of the numbers in terms of the actual damages are mixed. I've seen it as low as 135 billion to 275 billion on the high end. And it really, how to measure this kind of depends on what you really consider as true damage versus other economic impacts. Like if you look at just in terms of the damage of just structures destroyed and physical damage, like excluding, like, for example, people missing work because of the fires or less economic activity in certain neighborhoods not safe to go in, whether the ones where the fires taking place or the ones nearby due to just smoke and or repair costs, it gives very different numbers. Like if you just do physical direct damage, it's about 80 to 100 billion dollars. And a lot of that damage mainly is due to how expensive the properties are in the Pacific Palisades. If you've seen my first geography of wealth video where I talked about Los Angeles, one of the older money neighborhoods I did mention was the Pacific Palisades, and another one was Pasadena. And those are two of the most affected places of the California fires, which mainly kind of goes to the conclusion that old money really got hit hard in the California fire. So from a anthropological class analysis, those are the people who are disproportionately harmed, because the Palisades is one of the nicest and fanciest neighborhoods in all of Los Angeles and is known for a mix of old and new money. That's actually disproportionately a lot of people who work in LA's financial industry works and lives in Pacific Palisades. And so, yeah, a lot. There's actually a news story that in the New York Post about how a lot of asset management firms who's headquartered or has a lot of their key employees live in that part of LA were still really able to mostly chug along despite all of the turmoil going around them. So that's in terms of hard damage. The rest of it is other variables outside of the actual physical residence being burnt down. So now that the fires aren't completely contained, but the winds are expected to slow down, and it's unlikely to hop over freeways or other major barriers and impact some of the more urban, dense areas of Los Angeles. So the question is, now what? Like, what is the economic impact of this for Southern California and nationwide? Like nationwide, it's going to maybe be a minor blip in terms of U.S. GDP. It's going to have more localized effects, particularly in the state of California and in Los Angeles County. Uh, when it comes to those more localized effects, let's first start with the biggest one, which is the housing market. Uh, there are a lot of structure of houses that got burnt down. The number I've seen in terms of estimates is about anywhere from 10 to 11,000 residences have been burnt down due to these fires. And these are mostly higher income or old money people who have a significant amount of wealth and assets. So you are displacing a lot of people who have the means to move to other wealthy enclaves in Southern California. So it, you could expect either the rental market or the home purchase market in other new and old money enclaves in LA possibly to spike in value in the short term, or rents to go up. A lot of people are probably planning on rebuilding their houses in the Palisades. And if you look at the data, even though a lot of insurance policies have been canceled, a lot of them either were renewed or switched to the state operated fire insurance program that was kind of designed for when there was no private company willing to provide insurance in that area. So if you take the people who have signed up for the government-backed insurance or other insurance companies versus those who have been dropped, it's my estimates, and I mean I could be proven wrong here. I'm open to corrections. It's about 4 to 6% of Californians whose homes have been burnt down do not have insurance on their homes. So those people are going to have a big out-of-pocket expense to rebuild their homes. I might just outright sell the land and move on. There's also the Palisades, a disproportionate amount of people who have second homes. So they could just move to their second homes wherever they are, whether in other parts of California or in other parts of the country. And so it may not have the same impact on the real estate market as anticipated. If these people are going to move and stay in the local area, the most likely places they're going to go would be Calabasas, at least the parts that have not been impacted by the fire. They are going to go to Manhattan Beach, Santa Monica, and other parts of West Side LA generally. Some of them might trickle down to Orange County, probably most notably Corona del Mar would be a popular place, or Laguna Beach. And others will just move to other hotbeds. Like, however, the person who says, oh, my tract home in Dallas is going to go up 20% because of some rich LA person moving into my neighborhood, that's not likely to happen. So that is Malibu real estate too. I mean, Malibu, a lot of it has been burnt down. I think Pepperdine is still intact, but I don't really know the extent of how damaged Malibu is from this. A lot of Malibu was burnt down in a previous fire and never rebuilt. And Malibu has some of the most stringent NIMBY policies out there. So it's going to take probably the longest to rebuild out of anywhere in LA, is really my take on Malibu. It's so I think if the parts that survive, yeah, maybe. But most of Malibu also is second homes and tertiary homes. There are some people who live in Malibu as primary residence, but it's not as common, just simply because it's kind of out of the way. Even for people who live in LA, it's kind of a trek to get out there, based on my experience of driving there several times for business and personal reasons over the years. So that's kind of my take on the impact of Malibu. Somebody asked me that. So that's the thing. That's one possible scenario, is that real estate in Los Angeles, particularly rents, go up while the supply has been cut, particularly to those who have the means to make a higher bid in other parts of Los Angeles. The other real variable here is insurance. Like, California had a hard time having with insurance companies willing to cover homes in fire-prone areas before this disaster. And now with this disaster happening, I think insurance companies are even less unwilling to provide insurance. And California has a really bad system when it comes to this, where there was a law, I think in the 80s, a proposition that passed that the insurance industry has to be regulated by an insurance administrator. And what his job is, he's an elected position, the insurance commissioner, is to approve any price hikes for insurance companies. And if you're the insurance commissioner and you want to get reelected, you're politically incentivized not to allow insurance companies to raise prices, because you come off as a hero. Say, hey, look, I prevented the big bad insurance companies from raising your homeowner's insurance policy. Vote for me again. Where that sounds great in the short term, but in the long term, if you don't allow insurance companies to raise prices to the level that accurately reflect the risk of fire damage, they're just simply not, they're just going to pull their business out of the state and not operate there anymore. And that's precisely what has happened. And that is probably going to get worse in the future. And so that, as a result, you could see real estate prices go down significantly throughout Southern California, because you are now taking a risk that your house is going to be burnt down by a fire, and that you will not have the money to rebuild it because insurance won't cover it. I think this will disproportionately affect more middle-class neighborhoods that are close to fires and upper middle-class neighborhoods, because the very wealthy places, those people likely have the money, maybe not necessarily to rebuild a house completely and self-insure that way, but they can use other means to self-insure by upgrading the house to have more fire-resistant materials, have internal water pumps to keep out fires, and do their own brush cleaning, other things. Like a good example of a place in LA that has been successful at keeping the fires at bay despite being surrounded by it is the Getty Villa Museum. For those not familiar with Los Angeles, there's two Getty museums. There's like the Getty Museum on the top of the hill by Sunset Boulevard, which is like the famous art museum. And then there's the Getty Villa, which was previously like a private estate of J. Paul Getty, that since has been turned into a museum dedicated to ancient art, particularly ancient Greek and ancient Roman art. But they have some other ancient civilizations too. I've gone there a couple times. It's a great museum if you like ancient history. And it's like in this relatively forested area in the canyon between the Palisades and Malibu, which is right in the heart of where the fires were. But they had their own systems in terms of water pumping and cleaning out the brush and fire resistant building materials. And they did a lot of other precautionary measures. And so the Getty Villa is going to survive and remain fully intact, whereas everything around it has burnt down. And the implication really of that is you have is that there are ways you could fireproof your house. And based on my friends in real estate who I've talked to about this, if you're going to, for your typical like 4 or 5 bedroom, 3,000 square foot house, the cost of doing that would probably be about $120,000 to $180,000. So that's a meaningful amount of money for most of us watching this. But if your house is worth $3 million or more, is an extra 150 grand really gonna break the bank? Like, I don't think, like, yeah. And if your house value goes down by that much, like say like a $3 million house is now going to sell for 2.85 million, because you have to build that fireproofing equipment on your property. I don't think it's really going to change the very high end real estate market. But for the lower end real estate market, I think it could have a dent. And it's going, and a lot of these fires and the risk of your house burning down also has like a narrative mimetic effect, which may discourage the marginal person to move to California. In terms of the rebuild time, that's the other thing I'm going to talk about here. I think it'll be a little bit faster than expected, because Governor Newsom surprisingly did something to actually deregulate California. And he basically got rid of an executive order to get rid of any red tape on construction or environmental reviews for any area affected by a fire to be rebuilt. So like instead of say the fire taking like, I don't know, 3 to 5 years to rebuild the Palisades, I think the Palisades could be rebuilt in time for the LA Olympics. So like in 3 to 4 years. So like that, it'll speed up the rebuilding process probably by anywhere from 12 to 24 months. And so I think originally I thought that they could use this maybe to rezone it for more high density properties, because that's kind of a state policy here, is that they're trying to rezone as much as they can to build more highly dense apartments or duplexes or condos or things to be able to increase the carrying capacity, increase housing supply without actually appeasing the environmentalists in a way that they don't actually tear down new undeveloped land, but yet increase the density. So that's I think possible on the margin. I'm not saying that all of the Palisades and all the burnt down areas are going to be rezoned for apartments and multifamily, but I think a portion will, and maybe the people who sell because they didn't insure their property or they move somewhere else and just decide not to come back, or think it'd just be too much of a hassle to rebuild their property, might sell it to an apartment developer. That's another possibility. But yeah, I think especially with the Olympics, one of the comments people ask me here is like, will the Olympics be affected by this? I think the Olympics are still going to happen in LA. This isn't going to stop it. I just think that the Olympics in LA is going to rush the incentive to have this rebuilt in time for the Olympics, because it's kind of a national embarrassment what has happened here. And it's going to really put the political careers of both Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass in serious jeopardy. Whether it's Karen Bass maintaining her position as mayor in LA, or for Newsom and his presidential ambitions in 28 and beyond, because there were a lot of preventable things that could have been done. Like the reservoirs were untimely drained and not refilled in the area. You had just the fire department maybe not have the most competent people running that, or the water commission for the city due to certain hiring practices. There's also a lot of blame just not cleaning out the brush, and not and due to environmentalist pressures to not do that. And that's kind of why you've seen a spike in fires in California, just due to forest prevention measures. And a lot of this stuff, I mean, the fires probably would have happened either way, but they ended up being a lot worse than they could have been due to poor forest management policy and poor urban planning policy. But that kind of wraps up my thoughts really initially on the impact of the fires. We'll see more as the damage comes out, but that doesn't mean this live stream is over. Now I'm going to read some of your questions and keep this conversation going. I already answered the one about the Olympics. Let's see. Do you think the home values in Malibu will continue to rise in the coming years? Development will take years to complete due to high regulations. I think they will rise up to a point. The issue is, I think, with real estate as a whole. I don't know if you guys watched my series called Housing Isn't Expensive, You're Just Poor, and my debunking the doomer on high real estate prices. But there's a demographic problem with real estate. Over 55% of real estate is owned by boomers. If you count people over 55 in general, it's almost 2/3 of the real estate in this country. And I think that the percentage of people who own real estate in LA in those demographics is higher, just because of how much more expensive it is. And once that generation turns over and there's not younger people of the same level of income or wealth to replace them, that's going to open up a lot of housing supply nationwide. Like there are some markets like the Mountain West, I've talked about this before, that are benefiting from just so many people moving there and organic population growth that they're not going to be affected. But LA is not going to be one of those places. So that's always my main concern. I think I could see two different worlds here. I can see one where the fires hold up real estate a little bit longer in Los Angeles than other cities when the real estate market does start to unravel. I can see another world where the uninsurability of fire insurance for Southern California actually has the opposite effect and makes it less attractive, just because the cost of ownership or the cost to self-insure yourself from a fire is too high for most people to live here. So yeah, and people ask me if I've been affected by the fire. No, I live about over 50 miles south of the fires. I had some friends and family members who've had to evacuate, but fortunately none of their properties were burnt down. It was just more of a smoke hazard risk for them. But yeah, I think the city will, in the long run, be able to recover from this. And there's a lot of great people who are making efforts to help relieve those who have homes who have been damaged by the fires. And it's unfortunate for everybody. But America is generally resilient to national disasters. And I don't see this being any different. Can you see the smoke from where you are? No. If I drove maybe about 10 miles north, I would start to like have breathability issues. Like the air quality for about 40 miles surrounding the fires is pretty bad. And a lot of people are encouraged to work remote or stay inside. I'm fortunately just outside of that ring, but there were a few days like over the weekend where I did notice that the smoke was pretty bad. And I did have to go up to LA during the fires for at a different part of town that wasn't affected for a meeting. And when I was driving up there, the smoke did kind of come through and I felt it in my car. So yeah, I mean, it is noticeable, but it's within a 40-mile radius generally of the fires where they are that noticeable. Let's see, with the demographic and the Palisades losing their homes, wouldn't you assume demand for higher-end homes to increase? With Malibu being a neighboring higher-income city, do you think people migrate there? Well, Malibu is also affected by the fires, so I don't think Malibu would be the place where you'd see people migrate to. It would be the other high-end neighborhoods, what I mentioned earlier. It'd be places like Manhattan Beach, Santa Monica, Beverly Hills, and Calabasas, maybe even Santa Barbara if they're retirees and don't have to be in LA on a day-to-day basis. Some parts of Orange County, possibly, like I mentioned before, like Corona del Mar and Laguna Beach. Those will be impacted, and this does support them in the short term, especially. I think might be more impactful on the rental market because it seems like most of the people, based on what I've read, want to rebuild and stay in the Palisades long term. But for like the next 2 to 3 years, they're probably going to need a place to live. So I think it might affect the rental market. Let's see what else. I mean, it takes me. I don't think there's any more fire specifically, right? And I mentioned about the development regulations. I think on the state level, the governor is doing all he can to cut the red tape as fast as possible for the rebuilds. Wouldn't those owners want custom builders? They're not nearly enough contractors unless they utilize a large home builder. I mean, since there's enough demand, I think there will be contractors to supply. I think the labor glut is probably going to be the biggest thing that prevents the rebuild from happening as fast as possible. But I mean, I think a lot of developers see the opportunity here. So there'll be, I think, plenty of people who want to come in and fill it, especially since these have relatively high budgets. Do you think this will cause a dislike of the Democratic Party? I think it possibly could, actually. I mean, historically, Southern and Northern California, like the 1990s, generally are on opposite sides of the political spectrum in California. When California was a more purple state, Southern California was more Republican leaning, and Northern California was always more Democratic leaning. And like from the 1990s to basically 2020, for a lot of political reasons, both LA became a lot more left wing. Same with Orange County and San Diego. And now I think with the mismanagement of Los Angeles and just the historically more conservative roots of Southern California, it's not really as much of a true believer as, say, like San Francisco is on a lot of this stuff. And historically, how also a lot of the leadership on the statewide level in California is mainly from a few well-connected San Francisco families and those affiliated with them. There's like if you look at on most people on the statewide level in this office here, they have usually some ties to the San Francisco political machine, especially the last several governors in the state. As a result of that, I think you'll start to see more resentment between San Francisco and LA and that is going to create a political divide. So I think you could see Southern California trend more to the right. It already has a lot since 2016, but I think you could see that continuing to happen. I don't think Northern California is going to really change its politics. I mean, the current iteration of the Democratic Party is really in line with San Francisco, and so I think it will stay. If the Bay Area gets less blue, it'll be due to people moving out of the Bay Area for economic reasons, kind of like what happened with Detroit. I did a video about this 2 years ago called San Francisco is the next Detroit. So if you want to learn more about that, but I think Southern California will get more red and Northern California will remain blue. And that will basically be political battles will be basically between LA and the Bay Area like it historically was. And it makes sense. Like you shouldn't, like the two biggest population centers in a state that have competing interests naturally shouldn't be on the same side politically. It's just the fact that you had a national urban trends and specific things that demographic shifts happened in California that made them aligned. Even within the Democratic Party, all the factions often are the LA faction versus the San Francisco faction. So that's kind of my thoughts on that. Let's see. All right, next question I have here is, what do you think Trump will do in his first month in office? Well, I think he will strike down a lot of the last minute executive orders that the Biden administration has put in. I also think that he will try to do something with this whole Greenland purchase. Whether he's successful or not, I don't know, but they will make an effort on it. There will be a major crackdown on immigration. I think that will happen fairly quickly as well. It's just to what degree. And it might be a little bit slower than expected for legislation because a lot of Congress people have been nominated for cabinet positions and the majority is super slim. So you might have to wait for a few of these special elections or appointments to refill all the members of Congress needed to get votes through. So that might not happen in the first month, any major legislation. That'll probably happen more towards year end. But that's kind of my take. The other risk really, I think, for what Trump could do is the 15 months is I call it like a kitchen sink quarter, or the idea that like a lot of publicly traded companies, you have the CEO, when a new CEO comes in, he'll just release a bad earnings report and put all the dirty laundry out there on the company and say to reset expectations lower so it can have a healthier and easier foundation for the new leadership to beat expectations and have a lower benchmark for comparison. I could see something like that happening with the Trump administration, where economic data might come out a little bit not as well as expected, and so it will give him a lower benchmark to beat. Because right now, with the economy's red hot, him coming in, and expectations are sky high, it makes it very easy for the current administration to disappoint. And that obviously has a lot of political ramifications. What do you think the U.S.'s approach to India will be? How will the USA handle India? I mean, it depends if the Indian government takes the whole H-1B controversy personally or not. I don't really know what Modi's views are on that or what India's views on that, because I could argue on both sides. On one hand, they like the fact that you see a large diaspora from India coming to America because it shows like the success of your people in other countries, and they might have remittance flows back or more tourism to India from other parts of the world because of this. And there's a lot of other economic positive benefits. But on the other hand, if you're India and you keep losing your first round draft picks to other countries, it makes it harder for your country to develop if all your best talent is leaving. So they're in an interesting predicament on what their stance would be on that. So yeah, I mean, I think that India and the U.S. had a pretty good relationship during Trump's previous administration, so I don't really see why that wouldn't continue. So Yeah, the answer is I don't really know. I don't really want to just say something that out of nothing. Um, let's see. The next question I have is, what are your thoughts on anti-natalist philosophy? Um, I I mean, from a personal level or from an economic level, because or what do you mean by like just the fact that people don't want kids? If people don't want kids, they shouldn't have kids. Like, it's not really a good thing for a child to be born for parents who do not want them. That causes a lot of negative psychological problems, and on a greater extent, causes a lot of sociological problems on a more macro level. Personally, um, I think that people should have big families because you learn certain values from having a lot of siblings that you wouldn't get if you were an only child. And um, you've also have other benefits in terms of like demographic balances. But the thing is that I think that a lot of the population issue is a self-correcting problem. Like, the reason why people are not having kids is because the cost of living is too high. Like, if the cost of a three-bedroom house was affordable or more, people would have more children. Nobody wants to raise kids in a studio apartment. Sorry, that's kind of the my answer to that. And if there's enough, the birth rate drops enough, and the population drops enough, the housing becomes affordable, the birth rates will come back up. Like, you can't say, "Oh, I'm encouraged. I want all these kids to be born. I want these high birth rates," but you don't have the capacity in terms of housing, in terms of food, in terms of resource infrastructure, in terms of slots at quality universities for education of these children, um, and not expand them. You can't perpetually grow yet keep your little fiefdom in terms of your high housing prices. Um, it doesn't work that way. You need if you like if you want to have higher growth rate and higher birth rate, you need to have a higher carrying capacity through lower housing costs and lower cost of living or higher incomes. Like, this is just, we've had history ebb and flow. When times are bad economically, people have less children. Um, and I think that's what we've been going through for the last 20 years. It's been a you would expect. Um, let's see. Um, what next question I have? Okay, so arbitrage from buying the burnt land. I didn't really go into that specifically because I don't really know what people are willing to, what the going price is for that, and whether buying it and building something on top of that would really net a profit. I can't really yeah, I had, is it lagging? Yeah, I had an unstable connection briefly. I think it's back. So that's to answer that question that just popped in. But in terms of arbitrage, I don't really know what the value play is there. Like, maybe if the numbers made sense, it'd be worthwhile to do that. But I don't really know. And speaking of just geography, the other thing I want to mention is the Analyzing Finance with Nick tour. We just got back from San Diego. We had on Saturday, and it was our highest turnout yet for a Analyzing Finance with Nick meetup. So these have been great so far. We've done 3 of them: one in San Francisco, one in Vegas, and one in San Diego. The next one is coming up here in Laguna Beach, California, which is pretty close to where I'm doing this, on Saturday, January 25th. If you want to attend, there's you can check any of my posts, and I'll post a link in the description or in the chat. working if where you can buy your ticket. It's going to be at a private residence, so if you want to know the location, you got to buy a ticket. But it'll be great. We're going to have myself speak. We're going to have Murphy McCann, I've brought on this show, speak, and possibly Chris Street as well come as well to speak at the event. So that's the that's where we're going to have the next one, is in Laguna Beach. And yeah, because these first ones have been so successful, I'm going to expand it to other cities. We're going to do the Northeast in the spring, 4 different cities in the Northeastern US, Philadelphia, DC, Boston, and New York. I'm probably going to try doing in Florida in February, and in Chicago, Seattle, Texas, and Santa Cruz, California, and maybe Scottsdale if I get enough interest. So yeah, that's the update. And then we're gonna try to do Europe in August and September. Switzerland's the only place that I have confirmed so far, but if my European audience has enough people in certain cities, I'd gladly come to those as well. So yeah, all those are happening. And then so back to that next question. Do you do career advice? People can contact me on my contact form on my website, and I do 15-minute quick consultations to see if I can help, but it really depends on the situation. But I will not talk about specific career advice on the live streams. I won't really do specific individualized advice, especially for investments. As a disclosure, like, nothing on this is investment advice. Just please do your own research. Or if you have specific questions about, like, for your financial situation or really any other individualized situation, you got to contact me directly, either through my website or via email. And yeah, Texas, we might do in March or April. I generally plan these things whenever it's the nicest climate in your city, because I don't like snow or extreme heat. So yeah, let's see next. Let's see. I'm going to scroll back to see if there's any questions that you guys want me to do. Let's see. I'm going to grab a sip of water while I'm reading through the feed. Okay, so with antinatalism, you mean, like, is it coherent? Like, is it unethical to have the idea that it's unethical to have children? I think that's wrong. There's nothing unethical with having kids. The only time it's unethical to have kids is that if you are not willing to be a parent and actually raise your kids. Like, assuming you want it, you're going to have a loving family. I think there's a lot of this radical antinatalism for environmentalist purposes is, quite frankly, a little bit crazy. I think that economic forces will manage the population to the size it needs to be. Like, I think when the population goes above carrying capacity, there's enough negative economic externalities that drive the birth rate down. Let's see. Yeah, the other thing, announcement for the channel is, you guys, I got your guys' votes for the Valentine's Day special for the video. And what we're going to do is, I'm going to do the social class and romantic relationships video for the Valentine's Day special. The hypergamy one, I'll probably make a members only video, because they were close. It was a tie. And so that's what I will do. And I'll probably do a live stream related to that theme also in February. So I know you guys have voted on that poll. So that's kind of the results for that. Okay, so I got a question about climate change here. What is my take on climate change? Watch my Debunking the Doomer video on climate change. I did a whole thing about this about 2 years ago. The general idea is that whether it's created by humans doesn't really matter. I'll even acknowledge that. The better question really is is climate change automatically the net negative? Because the built-in assumption is that climate change is by default bad, but that's not necessarily true. Like there are certain places that have become more favorable for living, that have better climates, or that are more arable, whereas other places are hurt. It just might be it's change, but change by default is not automatically bad, and that's really kind of the linchpin. But if you want my full argument, watch the Debunking the Doomer on climate change. Yeah. And then let's see. Okay, economic future of India. I might make a video on economic future of India. There's a lot of other countries I have in mind. I'm gonna probably do first, um, but I've done most of South America already. I've done a lot of East Asia. I think if I'm gonna do more economic futures, will probably be for some European countries. Uh, yeah. Can you do a video on all the kinds of arbitrages there are? I mean, that would be kind of a little bit unruly for a single video, but there's a lot of different arbitrages, both in like the capital markets and real estate and other things. I might just do one just explaining what arbitrage is and some examples, but I don't think you can. I don't think I can make a video on every single kind of arbitrage. And the other thing with arbitrages is that they don't last very long. Usually, when you see arbitrage opportunities, people are very quick to fill them, and they get sucked up by the market fairly quickly. So um, the world is generally efficient without structural regulatory barriers preventing it from doing so. So I just don't think that would be that great of a video, to be quite honest with you. Argentina. I did do a video about the economic future of Argentina a couple of years last year, right after Milei got elected. So if you want to see my thoughts about the economic future of Argentina, watch that. What do you think about Biden warning about a tech industrial complex in his Farrell address tonight? I think he's trying to play off the Eisenhower military industrial complex quote. It seems a little bit try hard, but I mean there is a risk really that the tech billionaires become an oligarchy. That is a real risk. I mean, that's not my base case for the economy, but it is a real threat, especially if I think that he's directly addressing antitrust concerns, and he's advocating probably that the Trump administration doesn't back down on the antitrust crackdowns that started over the last few years with things such as Google and Meta, and that they control basically near monopolistic control of their little corners of the internet. And the internet overall has been more consolidated to a few platforms. Like, think about how many websites for the older viewers on this stream. Like I remember when I was in high school and college, like in the 2000s and the early 2010s, like I went to a bunch of different websites, whether it's individual blogs or individual company websites for e-commerce or whatever. Like like every media outlet would have their own website. Whereas with social media becoming more mainstream, everybody now goes to a few platforms. So instead of going to, say, I don't know, if you're a college football fan, like the OregonDucks.com to find everything about Oregon Ducks or the Oregon Ducks message board. Instead, you're going to read about it on Reddit and X, or watch a video about it on YouTube. So the internet, all the communication, the internet, instead of now being on individual websites, is now consolidated to a few platforms. And that is potentially dangerous if either the government has too much control of them or a nefarious individual has too much control of them. So yeah, that's my take on that. The next thing is, what did you think about the book, The Alchemy of Finance? I've read it. The first few chapters are very good. The rest of it is kind of just repetitive examples of the concepts in the first few chapters. I think reflexivity is a very useful concept, and I learned about that in depth through reading The Alchemy of Finance. I think I did a 1 minute book review on the Alchemy of Finance, or maybe I just only did Soros on Soros. But I've talked about Soros too on the Iceberg of Finance. So if you want my thoughts on Soros, you can watch them there. Let's see. A California wildfire. That's what I talked about earlier in the stream, like the first 20 minutes or so. So if you want to see my thoughts on the economic implications of the California wildfire, do it there. I might actually edit this afterwards to create just like a regular video about the part where I talk about the California wildfire specifically. Yeah. The other thing, as I have a question, is if I'm going to be branching away from some of the class and old money stuff, what kind of content would you like to see on this channel versus the stuff I do? And feel free your comments below. I use this insight a lot. Let's see. But yeah, I'm gonna probably be on here for another like 15 minutes or so. If you guys have any questions, feel free to put them in. It seems like it's a little bit more quiet of a chat than usual, or maybe because let me just filter it to the live chat, because it seems like I'm missing a lot of stuff if it's just the top chat. All right, investing. For sure, certain companies. Actually, that's a pretty good one. Give me a second. Do you think that the Trump administration will make a serious effort to implement e-verify measures to curb employment of illegal immigrants? I haven't really seen anything that's going to indicate his bias one way or the other on that, but it'd be a good thing if they did, because it's like you can do all you want on border enforcement, but if you don't penalize people for employing these people, it's not going to be as effective as it could be. Let's see. Do you live in the OC because you like the quality of life or because you are from there? The answer is both. I think the quality of life here is really good. It's not really for work. It's really the times I moved away for the OC in my life, because I haven't lived here my entire life. I've lived here probably most of my life, but I've lived in several other cities all over the world. And I moved away from my university education. I moved away from my first few job opportunities because, like, to develop a career in finance, especially if you're in the more equity side of the market, not fixed income, Orange County is not, at least it was back when I was starting my career, not the best place to start a career in finance. So I had to move to build my career in the beginning, and also to explore new places. Like, I live in a great city. If I didn't go and see the rest of the world, I wouldn't know any better. I'd just be ignorant. And so, yeah, I spent 10 years living away in combined from Orange County, and those are 10 valuable years in terms of life experience and career opportunities and education that shaped who I am today. So, yeah, I think there's a very high quality of life here, which is why I stay. Also, I have a lot of family ties here, and I'm very involved in my local community, and my business is developing here in Southern California, and it helps for me to be here. So yeah. So that's my reasons. I think it's it's a very high quality of life place to live. It is expensive, but unlike other parts of California or other high cost of living things, I think you actually get what you pay for the most part if you live in either Orange County or San Diego. Like, the quality of life is worth what you're paying for. Other parts of California or the Other high cost of living places may not be. Yeah. And then let's see. Next question. How is the quality of life in the US different from Asia? I mean, as somebody who's lived both in the US and Asia, I can actually have some insight on this. Um, Asia, it really depends where. Asia is a very different place, and America is a very diverse place. But if I compare like the Orange County versus like the Orange County level equivalents in Asia, they're both very high standards of living, and they're both relatively expensive. Um, the difference, I would say, is that in Asia, the main difference is density. Like you don't have as much personal space that you do in America. Um, Having a single family home is a very expensive luxury that is just not attainable for 99% of the population in Asia, even in the more developed parts of Asia. Even the wealthy live mostly in townhomes and condos and things like that. So that's your biggest difference, I would say. Especially, I mean, in rural areas is a different story, but I didn't really spend any extended time in rural areas in Asia. Uh, and in Asia too, I would say I think it's considerably the developed Asia is considerably safer. It's lower crime, I would say, than the equivalent income level place in the United States. However, it's also I think you have less personal freedom, so that's another downside. It just in terms of like the way the legal structures in a lot of these countries, and also just the social pressure to conform is a lot higher over there than in the West. Um, and then food options are very different too. Like Singapore, you can get Western food, but the thing is that I still missed like Western food in Western countries, but the Asian food there is better. So you have different culinary options too. And then air travel locally is a lot cheaper in Asia. You can fly all over the continent for a fraction of the same distances that you would in North America. That's another kind of difference. But yeah, overall, it's plus and minuses. I prefer living in America. I think it's also a lot related to personal reasons, like my family is here, a lot of my friends are here. I like the more personal space and personal freedoms. And did I live in Hong Kong? No, I have not. I didn't live in Hong Kong. I've gone there twice for extended periods of time in like the same calendar year. But the city I lived in Asia was Singapore. But I've explored a lot of other parts of Asia. Um, yeah. Let's see. Yeah, it's in Europe. Europe. A single family home is more attainable, at least to rent one, maybe not to own one. And living in Europe, I've spent some time living in Europe too, and that is a very different experience too than living in North America. The main issue with living in Europe is lack of economic freedom. Uh, your taxes are generally high. They have a lot of regulations, especially against small business owners. And as a small business owner, it doesn't really suit my personal goals to live in Europe. I would maybe if America got just as economically uncompetitive as Europe is now, that might be encourage me to go across the pond. But um, as long as America has a giant economic freedom advantage to Europe, I don't see myself permanently living in Europe. But yeah, that's kind of my view on that. Um, and speaking of the comment about Spain and Latin America, I think there could be a scenario where like Mexico and Chile and Argentina have higher GDP per capita than Spain and Portugal too in 30 years. Um, what's it called? I do not do specific options trading advice on these live streams. Um, if you want that, um, that's not like if you have that's what I do for my clients on my wealth management firm, but not publicly. Um, yeah. Other things, I would say, yeah, I'm trying to see if I've got. Sorry if I'm a little bit slower today in terms of comments. Just doesn't seem like we have a lot more just statements versus questions here. Uh, but yeah, if I don't really have any more questions, I might just wrap this up here. Uh, but thank you guys all for watching. Hopefully, you got some insights about the California fires from this live stream. And if you like doing more of these style of things where I talk about a specific news story, but the turnaround time is too fast for me to do like a fully edited, produced video, then I will do it. And also, the other question I have before I go to is, how do you like the timings of these? What's the best time of day that I should do these? I've noticed I get the most engagement if I do them around 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 Pacific. This one might be a little bit late because I notice most of my audience lives in the northeastern United States or the eastern half of North America. So this might be too late for them. But yeah, that's kind of my take on that. But I'll probably do 1 to 2 of these a month. And the next one is probably going to be the Valentine's Day special. So I will probably also start releasing the notices before so that I have some pre-scripted questions to get started on it. But thank you guys all for joining me. I'm going to wrap it up here. And yeah, thanks for watching.